We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about some things based around the book, but first a bit of background. I'm from a place called Los Alamos, New Mexico. Now, does anybody know what Los Alamos, New Mexico is most famous for? Okay, somebody said the bombs, Trinity site, etc. Exactly right. My hometown is the place where they invented the atomic bomb. So I got a question for you. How many of you have seen the film Oppenheimer? Much of Oppenheimer was actually filmed in Los Alamos. There's a scene toward the end when they finally had the successful test of the bomb and they're all in this big lodge cheering and so forth. That's where my 50th high school reunion was held 2 months ago, that exact location. You probably didn't notice it, but I was in the film too. I thought Robert Oppenheimer was a pretty nice young man. He had a lot of potential. He needs to go back to his Peaky Blinders, though. It's been a lot of fun. When I was growing up in Los Alamos, it's a strange place to grow up. So I have a question for each one of you. If your hometown was a place where they built thermonuclear weapons of mass destruction, and where within 5 miles of your house and your school there were working nuclear reactors, you know, there's a massive weapons stockpile, and it's in the middle of the Cold War, and you were on the Soviet Union's top 10 hit list, what would be your main ambition when you turned 18? To get out, as far away as you possibly can. And so I applied to some faraway places, and amazingly enough, when I applied to Harvard, I got in. I remember that the letter came to our house that said, Dan's been accepted to Harvard. I said, this is amazing. My dad said, yes, it is. And then my dad kind of took a step back because there was the price. Harvard is pricey. At that moment, I realized I made a big mistake as a child. I forgot to be born into a rich family. It was in my game plan. I had it in my head. I just totally forgot it. Great parents, just not exactly Rockefellers. So my father got out our typewriter. I know you don't know what that is, but they have them in museums. And he wrote, Dear Harvard, please send money. Love, Roger. He sent it away, and about 10 days later, something showed up at our house called a letter. I know you don't know what letters are either, but they're in museums too. And the letter said, Dear Roger, we understand you're in financial strait that's very difficult. We really want Dan to come here, so we're going to help him out. We're going to give him a financial aid package. It'll have 3 components. Number 1, we're going to give him a small scholarship. Now, Roger, it's going to be small. But Dan perhaps will study something like microbiology here, and if he does, he'll be able to see his scholarship under our powerful electron microscope. And then, because we operate kind of like a bank here, Roger, we're going to lend him money. It's called a student loan. We're going to lend him so much money that first Dan, and then his children, and then the children of his children would all enjoy repaying it over the course of their natural lifetimes. And then, Roger, because it's a really expensive town, we're going to give him a lucrative, stimulating part-time job right here on the Harvard campus. Sold! So I showed up at Harvard, and I was very excited because it was a beautiful place. My first stop there was to go to the Student Employment Office to collect my student job. And I learned instantly people in Boston can be a bit abrupt. I walked in, I said, hello, and the guy said, what's your name? I said, your name, what's your name? I said, Moore. Yeah, okay, Moore. He had a sheet, Moore. No, Moore. Yeah, Moore. No, Moore. He said, yeah, I heard you the first time, Moore. Hey, Moore, where'd you park your car? What, your car? Where'd you park your car? Your car, you drove in a car, didn't you, Moore? Where'd you park the thing? You didn't park your car in Harvard Yard, did you? I couldn't understand a word the guy was saying. What I quickly understood, though, is that in Boston, they do not have the letter R. Now, later when I traveled more, I found the missing R's. Gravity had pulled them down into the state of West Virginia, where people studied the first president, George Washington. But he said, okay, Moore, I found your name here. You need a uniform for your job. By this point, I had spoken enough Boston to understand he meant a uniform. So he threw a uniform at me as a white coat. I got excited. This meant I was going to be in a laboratory with some prize-winning nuclear physicist or scientist. Then it went straight downhill. The next item of clothing was a hat made of paper, a net for my hair, this was the 70s, and then my name badge, assistant to the dishwasher. How many of you have ever eaten in a cafeteria where you have a tray for your food? Have you been in that boat? And then when you finish your meal, you go put it on this belt that moves away. Who's ever done that? You put on the belt and you go on with your life, don't you? Uh-huh. You just walk off, don't you? Do you even have a clue who lives on the other end of that belt? Yes, sir, that is the domain of the assistant dishwasher. My job is to take your unused food, put in the thing, hand to the dishwasher who was an immigrant who didn't speak English, he hated me. That's the place, that dormitory is where I met Marty Fritzen, who brought me into Southwestern Advantage. It was 50 years ago this month. 50 years ago this month, Marty Fritzen recruited me. He got me started in the business world, a place called Kirkland House. Now, roughly 30 years later, another young man started his business in Kirkland House. His name was Mark Zuckerberg. It's kind of a cool place to start a business. But because of that, I had the privilege and the opportunity to travel around the world, work with young people, hopefully share some ideas with them that can make a difference in what they do. And one thing that everybody wants to know is what's going to happen tomorrow. How many of you are not really sure, for example, what you're going to do in your future one day? That's an honest statement. You don't really know. Maybe you do know. I didn't know for sure until I was about 32. I had lots of ideas I didn't know for sure. One of the things we're going to talk about is how we can perhaps become a little bit more sure. Because this is a bunch of students, brilliant people, we have to have at least one equation, don't we? To qualify as an official talk, have to have one equation. But first of all, we're going to do a little time travel. This smiling face is you after Christmas holidays in a nice warm spot. 2024, your smiling face, you're here at the GLS. Question is, where will you be in 2034? Some of you may be in your hometown or close by. Some of you may be in a bigger city in your home state. Some of you might be in a different country, who knows? Here's another question, what about 2044? More importantly, how old will you be in 2044? Some of you are thinking, he's going to say the 40 word. That's an awful feeling. Some of you are going to be saying the 50 word. Some of you are saying the 60 word. Oh my gosh. It's totally fun for me working with young people because most people think anybody over 30 is ancient. But if you're lucky, you in fact will at one time turn 40. It'll be kind of a fun thing for you. Then at one time you're going to say to yourself, oh my gosh, I'm 50. For each hair that turns gray, you have two that turn loose. Very different experience. Where will you be in 30 years' time? Some of you may not even be on planet Earth. You know that, right? But don't worry, if we can get Matt Damon back from Mars, we can get you back from Mars. Just learn to grow potatoes before you do that. So this is our equation about the future. This explains everything you need to know about your future. Physics people in the room will tell you that the letter C actually stands for the speed of light in a vacuum. But it also stands for a constant, something that never changes. What does delta represent? Change of the rate of change, right? So the formula is telling us that the constant in our future is change. And that's the only thing we can count on in our future is we can't count on anything in our future. Are you feeling more reassured already? Good, I hope you are. Feeling good about that. Let's talk about some ways things are changing massively. First of all, what we call the digital universe, sometimes called the digisphere. What this is the sum total of all of the bits and the bytes, the megabytes, the gigabytes, the petabytes, the terabytes, the many, many bytes out there in the world accumulating in this issue called the digisphere. They float around in massive server farms. Sometimes they're known as the cloud. Most people have no idea how big it is, but I can tell you that it's doubling increasingly fast, and there's so much data out there right now, nobody can even keep up with it. In fact, interestingly enough, in the last 3 years, more stored data has occurred since the existence of stored data. It's going to continue to grow. Let's look at a couple examples of that. How many of you have, for example, a phone that will take pictures? And you're looking at me saying, Dan, retirement has stolen your brain. A phone that will take pictures? Duh, of course it will. But think about that for a moment. A phone that will take pictures. Now, if I were a time traveler from the 70s, in fact, I am a time traveler from the 70s, and I suddenly showed up here and I go, oh, whoa, man, far out. Whoa. And you said, hello, welcome to GLS. Far out, man. What time is this? 2024, dude. When are you from? I'm from the 70s, man. And you'd say, far out. Can I take a picture of you with my phone? What would I think? I'd say, hey, man, don't mess with me. Picture with your phone. Next, you're going to want to call me on your camera. You have no conception of a time in the world when you could not take a picture on a phone. How many of you occasionally back up your images? You know, that dessert you had last week that was so priceless you couldn't afford to ever lose that picture? So let's say we got 500 people in this room. Let's say each one of you only backed up 1,000 images, and I know that's a really low number. That'd be 500,000 images floating around us in the cloud up there someplace in the universe. If we took everybody in the United States alone that has a phone that could do this, roughly 200 million people, each one just backed up 1,000 images, that would be 200 billion images floating around in the cloud. If we took the roughly 7 billion people in the world that have a phone that can do this, each one backed up just 1,000, that's 7 trillion images floating around in the cloud. 7 trillion, which means if the wind is exactly right, it'll begin to rain. Selfies. And this is not the major source of data anyway. How many of you know a friend that spends a little bit of time in an area called YouTube? You know that friend down the hall? Not you. YouTube did a little study about the amount of data uploaded. It's interesting. Every minute around the world, every minute, enough data is uploaded into YouTube in 1 minute. It would take a single person more than 2,500 years to consume it. Who can do that? Nobody, but you all know that guy that's going to die trying, right? And these aren't even the biggest data sources. So the bottom line of it is data is getting bigger and bigger. Something called ChatGPT, AI, who knows what's going to go from there. It's a scary thought, but we need to understand it's going to happen. The world is changing very rapidly. Interestingly enough, since 1990, 32 new nations have emerged on the earth. Most of them since the breakup of the former Soviet Union. 32 new nations. So many countries have different names now than when I was a student in school. There'll be more of that later on. Some of you may have heard about this issue called Brexit. For many years, Europe was united with the United Kingdom. Not so much anymore. More importantly, and we have many representatives of a great country here, the unexpected things that happened some 2 years ago this next month, unexpected, uncalled for, undeserved, brought forth a real hero, a leader. We have many Ukrainian students in our program. I give them all great props. Slava Ukrainu. The fact of the matter is the world is changing so incredibly fast, we have to be willing to be nimble and change with it. Business, that can change a little bit too. How many of you study business? How many have a business? Everybody that sells books has a business, so you need to understand it's going to happen. Who knows what this company is most famous for? Netscape. Some of you going, not so fast. Interestingly enough, Netscape was the developer of the very first commercial internet browser that was graphical. The internet existed way before Netscape came up with it. Before that, though, there's a bunch of lines of text. It was boring. There were no illustrations to it. But when Netscape came out, Navigator, it was amazing. What that meant is individuals like us could take our computers, boot them up. Took 7 minutes to get it started. We could do that. We could go to Netscape Navigator. We could find out what the weather was outside. Before that, you had to open the window to see what the weather was, but it was really kind of cool. Netscape Navigator had a 92% share of the market for browsers, 92% share. Those of you that study business, would you agree that's a powerful market share? But right now, not one of you uses Netscape Navigator. You know why? They're out of here. They're wiped out by competition. How many of you instead use Google Chrome? How many of you use Safari? Anybody use Firefox? Anybody use Internet Explorer? The point of it is Netscape thought they're invulnerable, they're powerful, good things were happening. Look at some other companies that's happened to. In the industrial sphere, about 7 years ago, this company was named the most successful and most respected automotive company in the world. And then what happened? Does anybody know? Fraud. Their leaders were discovered. They lied and cheated all around the world on pollution control devices. 30 billion euros in fines, more coming, prison sentences for a lot of these people. And Volkswagen finally said, we're going to get out of internal combustion motors altogether. We're going to go entirely electric. Totally demolish the company. How many of you remember a store called Circuit City? Does anybody remember a place called Blockbuster Video? So if you don't think things can change very quick in this area, they can happen in a long time. Whole industries can change and disappear. Does anybody know what that object is? Slide rule. Slide rule. Some of you go, oh yeah, I knew that. No, you didn't know that. Anybody here from Texas A&M? Love Texas A&M. They stand up through every football game. Eventually they can afford to have chairs. They're pretty amazing people. But I was at Texas A&M, and I asked a group of students, I said, does anybody know what this is? And one young man, very polite young man, said, yes, sir, I do. When you go buy shoes, you put your foot in the thing and they measure your shoes. Not exactly. A slide rule is a calculating device. This is a calculator that will do 30 different kinds of computations. It'll do multiplication, division, exponents, decimals, powers. It'll do natural logs, logarithms, all the trig functions. Incredibly accurate, incredibly fast. And this was my high school graduation present from my mother and father when I went to Harvard. It was considered the Pickett Industries the finest metal slide rule ever made. Now you may have noticed, or you may not have noticed, it comes in this extremely attractive leather case. You further couldn't tell because it's a little ways away, but it has a little metal ring on the back. The ring would attach to a leather loop, and the leather loop would go to your... Yes, sir. Dan, you didn't. Yes, I did. I walked on the campus at Harvard. Yo. We'd have slide rule races, man. It was so cool. And then one day, second semester, my first year in college, a friend of mine named Mark pulled out something. I said, Mark, what is that thing? He said, Dan, it's called an electronic calculator. I said, it's a fad. It'll never last. The only place now you can see a slide rule is in a museum or my closet. Question is, what happened to all the people that designed and built slide rules for a living? What happened to them? So what this means is people trying to plan their careers, they really have some challenges ahead of them. A study was done about the jobs that exist today. Roughly half of the jobs today exist in industries and fields that did not exist a generation ago. 25 years from now, it's projected to be at least the same percentage. So what should you major in for something that doesn't exist? How about science fiction? That'd be a good start, right? So, are you getting a bit scared? Anybody getting a bit concerned about all this future stuff going on out there? You may be wondering, what can you do? What can you do about this? One recommendation I'd have is take long naps, extending into several days at a time. But eventually you're going to have to wake up and go to the bathroom, and you're going to discover things are even worse at that moment in time. So I have something else that's a little more concrete suggestion. Get to know the CIA. Not the one you're thinking about. They already know everything there is to know about you. Instead, CIA is a system to really divide all of the turmoil in the world into 1 to 3 buckets. Let's imagine, for example, this room is a waterfall of stuff coming at us from the sky, a waterfall of events, circumstances, changes, all the areas we've talked about plus some. This doesn't even include things like your relationships, your own maturity, your growth, etc. Imagine a diverter at the bottom of the waterfall that can divide things into 1 to 3 buckets. The smallest bucket, a very important bucket, is called C. These are things we can what? Fully control. Real quick, what are some things each person in this room can absolutely fully personally control? Okay, somebody says effort, somebody says attitude. I agree with effort. On attitude, if you can control your attitude, I got to tell you something, you're better than I am. I taught this stuff for decades. I taught it all over the world. You control your attitude. And then one day I was driving to work on the highway, minding my own business, in my lane, going the speed limit, and this young guy hit me from behind. He rear-ended me in his car. I go, what? Don't you know how to drive? What's wrong with you? I caught me, oop, I teach this stuff. We can control our effort. What else can we control? What's the first thing we can control every day? Yes, what time we wake up, absolutely, and how we wake up. Personally, I do not believe the snooze alarm has been a benefit to mankind. I think waking up, I'd rather just die once in the morning instead of multiple iterations of dying, so just get it done. How we make up is a decision. You can say to yourself in the morning, good morning, Lord, or you can say, good Lord, it's morning. Oh. We can control what we eat, how much we eat, what we drink, how much we drink. Can we control what we say to other people? Yes, absolutely. Can we control what they say to us? No. In fact, what about other people in general? Can we control other people? Well, I don't know. Some of you are kind of beefy and big. If the person you're trying to control is really small, you can probably get it around the neck and control them a little while, but you never notice little people are kind of slippery, and they get away and go, pfft. As try as we might, and entire civilizations can try to be controlled by despots, but the history of humankind shows eventually those despots get overthrown. Eventually there's something in people that says, you cannot control me. The things we can control, in other words, are very, very few, but they're very important. We must control all of them. The second big bucket, bigger bucket, are things we can't necessarily control, but things we can what? Influence. And the two largest areas we can influence I'm going to touch on today, there's many of them, I'm just going to touch on two tonight. One are other people. Do we influence other people? Absolutely. Absolutely, we influence other people. If you don't think that's true, when you get back next week to your home, run into a friend of yours, just look at him. Don't say, just look at him and go. You don't have to say, like, what? You totally influence them without saying a word. We influence people for the good by building them up, by sharing things that they've done that they don't recognize they've done that are great. We can also make people worse. We influence them for the worse by pulling them down to a level they shouldn't be at ever. We can, in fact, influence other people. We can influence them in tremendously important ways. How many of you are full-time students, in theory? Okay, good. Can you actually influence your teachers? Totally, there's two ways you can influence your teacher. One, for the negative. Come early so you can sit way in the back, go to sleep, text, check the sports center, everything else except study. Not a good way. Here's my strong suggestion. You want to be a better student and influence your teachers? Where you sit is extremely important. Let me check out. Don't ever sit in the front row. This is where all the nerds and the geeks sit. Second row, Martine's got the spot, right? The second row, this is where the cool people sit, because you're close enough to the front, but you still have a little cool card showing. Edgar's got the perfect spot. He's right in the corner there. And the way you take notes in that side, you look at the professor carefully, you take notes like this. It won't be long before he looks around. Everybody else is asleep or picking their nose or looking out the window, and you're the only one paying any attention. You're going to have a one-on-one lecture very soon. A very cool experience to have indeed. The other key area we can all influence, even if we can't control, is in fact our attitude. Our attitude. Two things I'm going to share with you about controlling attitude. One way you can control it, of course, is our physicality. Our physicality. How many heard the phrase in sales school, action cures fear? How many had a chance to practice that and realize that was true? Our physical nature. Well, let's say, for example, you're really sad and you want to feel more sad. Pretty easy. Walk slowly with your head down listening to Adele. I'm going to find someone like you. I mean, just in a heartbeat. But if you're sad and you want to feel better, walk 25% faster and listen to either 60s Motown or 70s disco. You cannot help but feel better. It makes a massive difference in our attitude if we can do those things. If you're kind of, well, let me do a little experiment with you. How many of you came here tonight so you could learn how to be more frightened and less confident? That's why you came. Okay, good. We're going to do it anyway. Play with me for just a second. In your chair, hunker down as small as you can be. Get a protective mode like you're about to be attacked. Helps to cover your head. It helps you tremble a little bit. And now just imagine the worst nightmare of your life is coming true. It's right there upon you. It's almost caught up to you. You can't get away from it. It's that dream where your legs don't move. You can't. It's right there on top. Okay, get up, get up. Oh, look up, please. Whew. You're only in that mode for 5.5 seconds. But studies conducted by Dr. Amy Cuddy of Harvard University showed that if you'd stayed in that posture for 2 minutes, your body would have generated a measurable increase in the amount of cortisol. What's the other term for cortisol? Stress hormone. Too much stress, you have shock, premature death, stroke, etc. Thank you for playing, by the way. Now, if you want to feel more confident, you go to the opposite. Everybody get full grizzly with me now. Just go get full on grizzly. Oh, yeah, here we go. Yeah. How many of you like classic Disney movies? Go full on Gaston then. Roughly the size of a barge. 2 minutes of that, your body will register a measurable increase in testosterone, which makes you feel more confident, more courageous. 2 little tips here can help your attitude. How you sit, how you move, how you stand. And the second major area of attitude is how we talk to ourselves. Self-talk. We're going to hit on that a little bit later on. The third bucket, and actually the largest bucket, are things we can neither control nor influence. They're things we just need to accept for now. For now. The friend of yours that you thought was a good friend that no longer seems to be such a good friend, they can tear you apart worrying about it. You rip yourself inside and out, worrying about what happened, why did it happen, Or you just accept for now, they're in a strange place right now. I can't do anything about it for now. I'm going to do what I can control and do what I can influence. As simple as that. How many of you know people that spend more of their precious emotional energy on things that we ought to just accept for now than they do on things they can control and influence? Who knows people like that? Who knows people that replay in their mind thousands of times what they should have said? Oh, I should have said, I should have. They just torture themselves. The things we need to accept don't have to be accepted forever. We just accept them for now. And realize that we can change the world if we can control, influence what we can control. Does this make sense to you? So here's my suggestion. Next time you're faced with a challenge, and you may have many challenges Monday just getting out of town. I want to thank our friends from the Baltic countries for bringing their snow with them here. It's going to be here on Monday. So have you ever seen people at the airport absolutely flipping out because a flight's delayed, freaking out because a flight's canceled? Just don't join them in that freak out. Instead, say to yourself, what can I control? What can I influence? That's it. That's all you can do. It's a very useful, simple tool to make a big difference.